Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have any lords present tonight. That will be rectified shortly. Those of you who do not know the format, this will take 20 minutes. It is a series of questions which I ask, answers which are given by our freedom fighter. Now, the series Freedom's Fighters basically focuses on those who have campaigned for individual liberty, for free trade, free enterprise, for markets, who have, in other words, fought the good fight over the years. And tonight we're very privileged to have Dan Hannan, the member of the European Parliament for South East.
Yes.
Doesn't say South East what, though?
No.
Just South East.
No, by the way, I love the idea that someone in this room is shortly going to be ennobled. I mean, quite right too, all of you deserve to be. My money will be on Isaby.
Well, if they need the numbers to pass the bills. Yeah. But yesterday, of course, an historic occasion, Her Majesty signed that piece of parchment, the European Union Withdrawal Bill. And I heaved the biggest sigh of relief I've done in 38 years.
Really?
Yes, it's been a long time a-coming. Now then, look, you've campaigned for personal liberty, free markets, free trade. What I want to know is, was there a moment in your life when you first became in favour of that? In other words, was there a light on the road to Damascus? Or were those the first words you uttered when your mum pulled the bottle out of your mouth? Did it happen suddenly?
I don't think they are anyone's first words, or in anyone's first million words, because liberty is a rather counterintuitive idea. The ideas that our opponents have seem plausible, although they often turn out to be specious. You know, the idea that a rationally organized economy will work more efficiently than one that is randomly left to arrange itself higgledy-piggledy sounds completely plausible. It just turns out never, ever to be true. And so I think you come to an understanding of liberty through the empirical method. It's not something that is in our genes. It's not something that we're designed to intuit. It's something that we learn. And in my case, I think it was really, when I came up to Oxford, I was still a fairly orthodox conservative, not particularly ideological. I did a history degree, and I began to spot the pattern that every country where people had more freedom and where the government was more constrained became happier and more prosperous than the ones where the state was big.
Someone who came out of Oxford with sounder views than they went in. You must be unique.
Well, there was a sort of libertarian movement. I was there in the early 90s, and there was a little libertarian. There were people who'd been on this journey before me. They weren't always the most clubbable people. They didn't seem particularly interested in winning converts, and they did display some of the habits of a cult. And so it was a while before I came to understand that they had a point about things. But I think it's a journey we've all got to go on.
Okay. You've been a member of the European Parliament for 19 years. What's the best thing you can say about the European Parliament?
Incredible array of people.
Okay.
You're there with every kind of sports star, newsreader, former Prime Minister. I mean, I was there with Dana, you'll remember, you know, all kinds of everything, Eurovision entrance. Exactly. I was there with Ian Paisley, I was there with Silvio Berlusconi, the most extraordinary and various kind of mistresses of European grandees. And I mean, a terrible way to organize any kind of democratic system, but an absolutely incredible place in terms of spending time with interesting people.
So the best thing was talent, right? What was the worst thing?
Well, the worst thing is to make a sort of a gloomy but serious point, the worst thing is the way it is arbitrary, the way in which the rules are set in order to clobber people that they don't like. So there is an unofficial, it's a bit like being in a sort of totalitarian state, although the consequences are less serious. There's a sort of understanding that if you're a goody-goody, they look after you. If your views are properly federalist, you can get away with anything. But if you're a critic, they will trip you up on something or other. And I remember there was a particular example of this. In theory, MEPs are given diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity can then be lifted by a vote of the entire chamber. And what's supposed to happen is that it's upheld if there is an obviously political prosecution. If somebody has made a speech critical of the president of some Eastern European country and are prosecuted, the Parliament will say, no, that is in pursuit of your duties as an MEP, but it's not supposed to cover a driving offence or shoplifting or something. In reality, of course, a completely different standard pertains. And if they don't like you because you're a Eurosceptic, they will always bang you up. And I remember one particular day where a goody-goody federalist was wanted for tax evasion, straightforward tax evasion, and the Parliament voted to uphold his immunity. And then Marine Le Pen was wanted for likening burqas to feeling under occupation. And of course, her immunity was immediately lifted. Now, the point is, one of those was political and one was not. But of course, that was not the determining characteristic. And this is the most draining thing about being an MEP, that you have to keep, in my case, you have to keep notes in triplicate for absolutely everything, because you know that they will always be looking to try and catch you out on some technicality, some form that you filled out incorrectly, and then say you're being investigated for corruption and all of this. That is a fairly wearing thing to have to live with for 19 years.
You were born in Lima in Peru.
Yes, si, senor.
Did you, you spent part of your childhood there?
Yep.
Yep. Are there any lasting memories or influences?
Yeah, I think this is, I mean, the big one, the big political one, was spotting the difference between a rule of law-based country and an unrule of law-based country.
Which was which?
Sorry. I'll tell you what. When I was 5, my father was a farmer, and a mob invaded the farm, or tried to, and as the land seizures all over the country, because it was a sort of Mugabe type situation. The government had announced a huge nationalization program, and as always happens in that situation, the police don't enforce property rights because they can see which way the wind is blowing, and people start taking the law into their own hands. And I can remember my mother taking me to the sort of back door. There was a gate that led into this footpath into the hills, and saying, "We're going to play a game. If we have to come this way again, we mustn't make a sound." You know? And my father was suffering from one of those diseases that occasionally afflict white men in tropical countries. And she kept on saying, "Let's get out of here." And he was saying, "This was nothing. This was desert, and I've got all these farm workers. I've got a responsibility." I remember him loading this revolver, and she was saying, "Yeah, they could blow you over. You've just got out of bed." You know, that was an early introduction to how politics can matter. And it was only coming here and spending time here at school and so on that it occurred to me the really surprising thing, which is that no one had been surprised that in most of the world it was assumed that property rights were contingent, that the rule of law came and went, that constitutions were ephemeral. And what a unique and precious thing it was to come to a country where you took for granted the basic freedoms under the law that defined Britain.
Excellent. One lasting influence I had from Peru was ceviche, the national dish. Do you like it?
Yeah, gosh. Although you can't really get it here. I mean, look, we can stop this interview and just talk about Peruvian food for the next hour. Because
but I've got a restaurant I can recommend.
Yeah, I have tried. Oh, I tell you, actually, no. I was about to say there is no good Peruvian restaurant in London. Actually, I make a partial exception, but none of you will believe that it's a Peruvian restaurant, even though it is, which is Nobu. Everybody thinks that Nobu is Japanese. He is a Peruvian chef. He opened his first restaurant in Lima. He became a chef in Lima, and his tiraditos and so on are it's Japanese Peruvian food. It's not Japanese food. Ceviche is the one Peruvian dish that has become internationally known. It's not the national dish.
Is it not?
No, Peru has an incredibly sophisticated cuisine, unlike, I'm afraid to say, everywhere else in South America, and in fact everywhere else in Latin America apart from Mexico. It involves lots of coriander, lots of red onion, there are 200 varieties of potato, and Peruvians talk and write and argue about what kind of potato you have with this kind of fish and so on. And they are astonished when they come to this country and the recipe book says potato. What do you mean potato? You know, it's a very food-oriented culture.
We're not providing dinner, by the way. Just there'll be drinks after this, but no Peruvian food. I suppose one of the most memorable videos we have of you was haranguing Gordon Brown in the European Parliament, and he had to sit there and take it. That was wonderful to watch. Did you prepare for that, or was it spontaneous?
I've never had the self-discipline to read from notes.
Okay. You didn't have any notes, I noticed
no,
that.
In fact, I was told just before, minutes before I stood up, an usher came over and said, "Mr. So-and-so, who was supposed to be speaking, isn't here. would you like his time, which turned it from a 2-minute speech into a 3-minute speech. So I said, yeah, I've got a few things I'd like to say. So in that sense, it was spontaneous because.
Okay. Have you ever thought of standing for this Parliament? And
Not
I mean
for a
the
long
Commons,
time.
of course, not.
Yeah.
Sorry, I mean the Commons, not the.
Not the other, which is about to be filled with all the people in this room, as
Well,
you said
yes,
earlier.
We'll take your names and
Wouldn't that be
addresses.
great? Wouldn't that be great if everyone here was if we stuffed the House of Lords with libertarians? What a change that would make.
When we look up your interest, we see the word Shakespeare coming up 15 times. Who's your favourite character from Shakespeare?
That's a really good question.
There you go.
So A.C. Bradley, who was the great authority, said there are 4 inexhaustible characters in Shakespeare. They are Falstaff, Hamlet, Iago, and Cleopatra. And of those, I think the most interesting and the deepest and also the most relevant now is Cleopatra.
I was about to say, it's not Cleopatra, is it?
It is Cleopatra. I'll tell you why. I think, she was the archetype for all of the kind of Kardashians and all of the people who are famous only for being famous, right? Her lovers, Pompey and Caesar, they had achievements. Antony, they all, they were military men, they were doers. She was famous just for being herself, and she was obviously as inscrutable to poor Antony as she is to any male theatre goer. And yet she is this incredibly inexhaustible character, and I think one of the toughest parts in the whole canon to play, because Cleopatra has a theatrical side to her. She has a histrionic tendency. So the actress has to not only play Cleopatra, but she has to convey that she is Cleopatra playing Cleopatra. And that's a very, very difficult thing to pull off.
Who's the least favourite?
I'd have to say Shylock, because he's so plausible.
Really?
The difference between, you see, the difference between, he's not just an easy anti-Semitic trope.
Is he not a comic character?
No. Compared to Barabbas in Marlowe's Jew of Malta, that is a cartoon baddie. Shylock is given just enough humanity. He's made just plausible enough. You have just enough sympathy with him for his malevolence to be shocking. And I don't think Merchant of Venice would be performed anywhere in the world if it were written by anybody else. It is, and almost every time I've seen it performed, the part of Shylock has been made more sympathetic than a bare reading of the text suggests, because modern sensibility demands it, right? Where we are now sensitive to anti-Semitism in a way that in Shakespeare's day people were not. And so very few directors bring out the real difficulty of that role, which is Shylock is not just a nasty piece of work who is Jewish. He is nasty in a very specific way. He's greedy, materialistic, and worst of all, he's standing on the letter of the law. He is, as it were, trapped in the Old Testament, unable to understand the concept of mercy. And that is such a dangerous and difficult archetype to have on stage.
I'm just wondering if any of people here qualify under that description. I'm hoping not. Okay. Comedies or tragedies of Shakespeare? Which do you prefer?
Oh, tragedies. I mean,
yeah, me too.
I think again, rather like the four. I mean, can we take Macbeth, Lear, Othello, and Hamlet off the table as kind of they're in a different league, but actually I think I prefer the histories to the comedies. I'm really obsessed with the two historical.
Okay, we've got to do some quickies now.
Okay.
Beer or wine?
Wine.
Red or white?
Red.
European or New World? Aha.
If somebody else is paying, a good Burgundy. Otherwise, a nice New Zealand Pinot Noir.
Oh, right. Okay. Very good. Crisps or peanuts?
Cashews.
Really? Me too. Yeah. Okay. Good. You've got taste. Football or cricket?
At the moment, you've got to go with football, haven't you? I mean,
yeah, for the moment. But
there was. Did you see? By the way, I should say for people watching the recording later, we're talking hours after Germany's unexpected exit, which I thought there was the most wonderful comment on Twitter, which was, "For you, the VAR is over."
Yeah. And finally, chocolate or ice cream, or both, indeed.
Chocolate, I think, after years in Brussels.
Well, now, when you meet people who've yet to be convinced of the arguments in favour of freedom, what's the best argument you can give them?
That freedom, your freedom, like your health, is something that you only really notice when it's under threat or when it's gone. The fact that you have to put that question at all is a very kind of British luxury. In a lot of bits of the world, asking people what was valuable about freedom, people would say, what a stupid question. Look at the oppression we're living under. Try a serious diminution. I mean, what a luxury we have that we can complain in this country about nanny-statery in foods and stuff, compared to being in Turkmenistan or something. Ask people there what freedom means.
Okay. Occasionally, people on our side come up with arguments against freedom. What's the strongest argument against it you've ever come up against? The one we really need to get on top of?
I mean, I think I'm not sure the strongest one, but the one that carries the most people, that convinces the most people, is that freedom is in opposition to fairness. That a society where there is more freedom is a society where there is more selfishness, more greed, fewer ties that bind us socially. You and I know that that is not the case. But like so many of our arguments, you need to carry people with you. You need to explain why it is. And part of the problem is when people say, I want fairness, it's not really that they're saying that they want equality or that they want equity or even that they want reciprocity. What they're really saying is, look how nice I am. It's a kind of narcissism. I want fairness.
You're saying virtue signaling.
Yes, yes. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Look at me.
Now, we all have known people who've gone to Brussels with good intentions and have gone, as we say, native. You never did. Was there a reason for that?
Well, I had quite a strong agenda when I went there.
Fair.
But I remember talking to a veteran Danish Eurosceptic at the beginning when I was new MEP, and he said, you will be surprised by some of the people who swim with the tide and some of the ones who don't. Because it's not so much a question of integrity, it's a question of intellect. So the people who are constantly saying to themselves, ought this from first principles to be something that the EU is doing, will be, even if they're not particularly principled people, will be much more immune than the well-meaning people who would never take a bribe, would never consciously do something sordid, and yet who, without realizing it, osmose attitudes from people around them and normalize attitudes that are very different to those that they began with.
Go native, as we
that's,
say.
That's the thing, that going native is an unconscious subliminal process. That's why it's so dangerous.
After the Brexit vote, famously you said the EU would lose a bad tenant and gain a good neighbour. We've had somewhat tortuous negotiations since then. Do you think that's still true? And will they be a good neighbour to us?
I think in the long run, yes, it is still true. It's clear that they are losing a bad tenant, and yes, I think we will be good neighbours. But you're right, the negotiations are much more tortuous than they need have been. I think we have made a series of unforced errors since the vote, and some of them were weirdly errors of overcompensation, and maybe inevitably. I think if a leaver had formed the government, which was the almost universal assumption 2 years ago, the tone would have been much more conciliatory, the desire to bring the two sides together would have been much more visible. Because the Prime Minister, 3/4 of her cabinet and 2/3 of her MPs had campaigned to stay in, I think they felt they had to prove that they actually were committed to delivering the result. And that led not only to some harsh language, but to some absurd policies on, insisting on keeping out foreign students and this kind of stuff, which I think was a mistake.
Do you think the EU will survive in its present form?
And not forever. Europe will survive, but...
The EU? So.
Yeah, Europe will survive, but the Holy Roman Empire, the Hanseatic League and so on come and go. The European Union will come and go like any other political...
Okay, let's put a time limit on it. Do you think it'll survive in its present form for 10 years?
Do you know, nobody can answer that. Every clever dick thinks they have an answer. I can remember travelling in what we still called Eastern Europe in the 1980s and thinking, this can't survive, because nobody believes in it. Right? Even the people running East Germany and Czechoslovakia, they didn't believe in Marxism, if ever they had. Right? And yet I couldn't see, and nor could anyone else, the mechanism by which it would end, because there were so many people who had a vested interest in it. And there were one or two optimists who said, well, there'll be some 20-year reform process in communism. There were a few real outliers who said, no, there'll be some great shock, a Chernobyl-style breakdown that will lead. What was the event that brought it down? It was the decision of the Hungarian Foreign Ministry to stop requiring exit visas from East Germans who wanted to travel to Austria, and within a couple of weeks the whole system had unraveled. So this could happen any day, but it's almost always something that you couldn't see coming.
Okay, we're going to do the last question, which is Anthony Fisher, a World War II fighter pilot, decorated, went up to Friedrich Hayek and said, what can I do to help liberty? And Hayek basically said, don't go to politics. You know, do academic research,
right.
Start a think tank, and lo and behold, the IA was born, and
then,
all good things
yes.
came from that. Now, if a young person aged 18 to 20 came up to you today and asked you whether a career in politics was worthwhile, what would your answer be?
I mean, if that person had the same entrepreneurial ability that Anthony Fisher had, do the same thing. Because Anthony Fisher had a unique ability. He was good at making money. He then, as you know, nearly lost it all on a scheme involving turtle eggs. But he, I think he has changed the world more benignly and more profound, and is still doing so. You go to an Atlas dinner now and you see the amazing reforms that he is still from the grave carrying out. That was an incredibly valuable. So what I would say to anyone in that age range is, if you want to go into politics, you need to have a clear purpose. There's no point in being a politician. In fact, anyone who fancies the life of being an MP needs their head examined. There is nothing fun or glamorous about it. The hours are bad, the money is bad, there's no privacy, the world thinks you're a crook. None of that matters as long as you are delivering something that you couldn't otherwise be doing in a different walk of life. None of that matters. But do not end up treading water because you thought that being an elected parliamentarian would be glamorous or fun. It's not.
And there's no finer note to finish on. And that is what every freedom fighter should believe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Those of us who know our format will know there are no questions. We go downstairs and have some more drink. And I hope our speaker will stay another 10 minutes, if possible, and chat to us before he has to go along to his other engagement.
With pleasure.
There you go.
With pleasure, where I'll be listening to, instead of making a speech for once, I'm listening to a speech by Dominic Grieve. It's going to be great fun.
Okay.